we opened the door and looked in with my flashlight, and that's when I saw this girl slumped over in the seat.
16 years in prison. That's how long Joshua Kezer lost for a murder he didn't commit. Meanwhile, somewhere in Missouri, the real killer was living free, watching as an innocent teenager took the fall for his crime. For 3 decades, he must have thought he'd gotten away with it. The brutal murder of 19-year-old Angela Michelle Lawless on that cold November night in 1992. Her body was found on a quiet exit ramp off Interstate 55, a crime scene that would expose the darkest flaws in our justice system. 1 young woman dead, 1 innocent man imprisoned, and a killer who almost wrote the perfect ending to his dark story until December 2024, when modern forensic science finally caught up with him. This is more than just another cold case turned hot. This is a story about shattered trust, broken justice, and the relentless pursuit of truth that finally brought a killer to face his past. This is the story of Michelle Lawless and the 32-year journey that would finally unveil her real murderer. But before we dive deeper into the mystery, I'd like to ask you a small favor. The statistics show that more than 70% of you watching aren't subscribed to the channel yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into true crime and want to stay updated on future cases, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow and ensure you don't miss out on any new videos.
Well, it's about Michelle and Michelle's family and finding justice for her. But it's also about the integrity of the justice system. The criminal justice system has failed in this case once already. It failed the family, it failed Michelle, it failed Josh Kezer. And I'm going to make sure it doesn't fail them again.
Angela Michelle Lawless had the kind of life that embodied small-town American dreams. Born on August 2nd, 1973, to a loving family in Benton, Missouri, she was known simply as Michelle to those close to her. At just 19, she stood no taller than 5 feet and weighed barely 95 pounds, but what she lacked in size, she made up for in spirit and determination. Growing up in Benton wasn't just about small-town life. It was about community. With a population of barely 700 people in 1992, it was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your family, and your business. The town itself, nestled in Scott County with the mighty Mississippi River just a few miles east, had been there since 1822. Its main artery, at Interstate 55, connected the sleepy community to bigger cities like St. Louis and Memphis. But Benton maintained its close-knit charm. Michelle was more than just another face in this small community. She was a freshman nursing student at Southeast State Missouri University, carrying the hopes and dreams of a bright future in healthcare. Her path to nursing wasn't surprising to those who knew her. She'd spent years as a candy striper volunteer at the local hospital in Cape Girardeau, participating in countless charity events. A green belt in karate and former Girl Scout, she wasn't afraid to stand up for herself or others. At Thomas Kelly High School, where she graduated in 1991, Michelle had been a cheerleader for the basketball team. Her presence was felt throughout the school's halls, and her graduation had been a stepping stone toward bigger dreams. Those who knew her described a young woman with an infectious smile and a determination to make something of herself. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect life, there were complexities that would later become crucial to understanding her tragic end. Her relationship with boyfriend Leon Lamb had spanned 3 years, beginning when she was just 16. Their romance, documented in her personal diaries, painted a more complicated picture than the happy couple they appeared to be on the surface. No one could have predicted that on November 8, 1992, Michelle's life would be cut tragically short, less than half a mile from the safety of her home. The same community that had watched her grow up would soon be torn apart by questions about who could have committed such a horrific crime against one of their own.
There was definitely some type of struggle outside the vehicle, blunt trauma, and back in the car, and that's where she was shot. There was actually a pretty good spot of blood right here.
In the early hours of November 8, 1992, what seemed like a routine call would become the beginning of a 3-decade mystery. Jerry and Ruth Householder spotted something unusual on their drive. A car parked at the top of the northbound exit 77 ramp off Interstate 55, its engine still running, headlights cutting through the darkness. Something didn't feel right. Instead of investigating themselves, they made their way to the Benton Sheriff's Office to report what they'd seen. Reserve Deputy Rick Walter and Officer Roy Moore arrived at the scene at 1:29 a.m. What greeted them was a 1986 Buick Somerset, silent except for its idling engine. As Officer Moore carefully opened the driver's side door with 2 fingers, their flashlight beams revealed a scene that would haunt them for years to come. There, slumped over the center console with her head near the passenger seat, lay Michelle Lawless. The amount of blood told them this was no accident. The crime scene painted a picture of incredible violence. Michelle had been bludgeoned repeatedly and then shot 3 times at point-blank range, once in the face, once in the back of the head, and once in her back. But it was the evidence scattered around the scene that began to tell an even more disturbing story. Blood drops traced a path across the off-ramp, leading investigators to a bloody guardrail. Below it, down a grassy embankment, they found a large concentration of blood on the ground. Her rings were discovered in the center console under her body. Her handbag, found under the passenger seat, still contained her wallet, ruling out robbery as a motive. Most tellingly, her socks were muddy, but she wasn't wearing any shoes. The careful positioning of her body and belongings suggested this wasn't a random act of violence. The evidence told a chilling story. Michelle had likely been forced from her car, possibly after stopping for someone she knew. The window was rolled down just 5 inches. Enough to speak with someone, but not enough to suggest she felt threatened initially. She had run or been dragged down the embankment, where she was brutally attacked. Then, in a bizarre twist, her attacker had carried her back up to her car, leaving a trail of blood along the slope. More disturbing still was what investigators found under her fingernails, blood and biological material that wasn't hers, suggesting she had fought desperately for her life. The 3 bullet casings from a .380 caliber automatic handgun found in the car indicated her killer had wanted to make absolutely certain she was dead. The clock was already ticking when Mark Abbott walked into the sheriff's office at 1:30 a.m., claiming he'd discovered the scene earlier. His statement would set off a chain of contradictions that would muddy the investigation for years to come. Abbott claimed he'd reached through the driver's window and lifted Michelle by her waist, yet showed no signs of blood on his clothing. He spoke of seeing a white car with Hispanic males leaving the scene, then changed his story multiple times in subsequent interviews. A crucial witness account came from Dallas Butler, who had passed by the exit ramp around 1 a.m. He reported seeing 2 vehicles, a dark sedan and a lighter Ford truck. He described seeing a young woman in the driver's seat, head bowed but showing no signs of injury, and a nervous-looking man standing by her door wearing a red hat. When Butler asked if they needed help, the man had quickly dismissed him. The crime scene evidence suggested this was deeply personal. The overkill nature of the attack, the return to place her in the car, the fact that nothing was stolen, all pointed to someone who knew Michelle. But who would want this promising young nursing student dead? And why take such elaborate steps in the commission of the crime? As dawn broke over Benton that Sunday morning, investigators knew they were dealing with something far more complex than a random act of violence. What they didn't know was that their pursuit of justice would lead them down a path of wrong convictions, buried evidence, and a killer who would remain free for over 3 decades.
I was told personally several times from several different officers, leave this alone. You know, so that's a huge problem when you're trying to get help from other departments and they don't want you to look at this.
By 1994, The pressure to solve Michelle's murder had reached a boiling point. The small town of Benton demanded answers, and investigators believed they had found their killer, a 17-year-old from Illinois named Joshua Kezer. What followed would become one of Missouri's most notorious examples of justice gone wrong. The case against Kezer seemed suspicious from the start. Mark Abbott, the witness, whose contradictory statements had already muddied the investigation, suddenly identified Kezer as the man he'd seen in a white car near the crime scene. This was the same witness who had initially described seeing a dark-skinned Hispanic male. One look at Kezer, a fair-skinned teenager, should have raised red flags about Abbott's credibility. But the problems with the prosecution's case went far deeper. There was no physical evidence linking Kezer to the crime scene, no fingerprints, no DNA, no murder weapon. The prosecution's case hinged entirely on circumstantial evidence and testimony from 3 prison inmates who claimed Kezer had confessed to them while in custody. It was the kind of jailhouse testimony that experienced investigators know to treat with skepticism. Even more troubling was the alleged motive. Prosecutors claimed Kezer and Lawless had argued at a Halloween party the week before her murder. But when the host of that party was finally contacted years later, she testified that she knew everyone who attended. And Kezer had never been there. In fact, there was no evidence that Kezer and Lawless had ever met or even knew each other. The most damning piece of evidence presented at trial was a jacket belonging to Kezer that police claimed had tested positive for blood matching Lawless's type. Years later, when the jacket was retested, the blood stain turned out to be nothing more than tomato juice. But by then, the damage was done. Despite having an alibi placing him 350 miles away in Kankakee, Illinois, on the night of the murder, Kezer was convicted of second-degree murder in February 1994. The jury, presented with what appeared to be a solid case by skilled prosecutors, sentenced him to 60 years in prison. At just 17 years old, Joshua Kezer began serving time for a murder he didn't commit.
I was incarcerated at 18 years old. I was immediately caged with violent offenders who wanted to physically harm me and sexually harm me.
Inside Missouri State Penitentiary, known grimly as the bloodiest 47 acres in America, Kezer was assigned to Block 4, Cell 99, the same prison that had once housed James Earl Ray, the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr., would now be home to an innocent teenager. While Kezer adapted to life behind bars, the real killer remained free, watching as another man paid for his crime. What the jury never knew was that the prosecution had withheld crucial evidence that contradicted their narrative. The 3 jailhouse informants who testified against Kezer would later admit to lying, revealing they had been promised benefits in exchange for their testimony. But these revelations would take years to surface. And in the meantime, Joshua Kezer's youth slipped away behind prison walls. The conviction of Joshua Kezer didn't just rob an innocent man of his freedom, it allowed Michelle's real killer to escape justice. As Kezer began his 60-year sentence, the truth about what happened that November night in 1992 remained buried, waiting for someone to dig deeper and expose the flaws in a case that had sent the wrong man to prison.
It's called a monster, calling me a killer.
Sometimes truth has an unlikely champion. For Joshua Kezer, that champion came in the form of Rick Walter, the same reserve deputy who had first discovered Michelle's body that fateful night. By 2005, Walter had become the elected sheriff of Scott County, and something about Kezer's conviction had never sat right with him. In 2006, Walter did something almost unheard of in law enforcement. He reopened a case that everyone else considered closed.
Why did you do that, sir? The case was closed. You had a person in prison convicted.
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, you hear a lot of things. A lot of it came from the street, so to speak, from people that I had talked to that come up to me and over the years, not just since I've been sheriff, and said that they felt that a lot of people said that, you know, they asked me point blank, do you have the right guy in prison? And some people said that I didn't.
What he found as he dug into the old case files was shocking, even to a veteran investigator. Buried in the evidence was an old notebook belonging to former Sheriff Bill Farrell. In it, Farrell had written that he didn't believe Kezer was involved in the crime. Yet in court, he had testified against him. The implications were staggering. The same sheriff who helped put Kezer behind bars had privately doubted his guilt. But the most damning revelations came from the witnesses themselves. One by one, the 3 inmates who had testified about Kezer's jailhouse confession admitted they had lied. They had been promised reduced sentences in exchange for their testimony, a detail that had never been revealed to the defense. Chantel Kreider, who had testified about seeing Kezer argue with Lawless at the Halloween party, now admitted she had been mistaken. Walter's investigation also uncovered troubling forensic discrepancies. The jacket that prosecutors claimed contained Lawless's blood had never been properly tested. When it finally was, it revealed no blood at all, just the tomato juice stain that Kezer had claimed all along. More importantly, DNA testing of evidence from under Lawless's fingernails, which hadn't been available in 1994, would later prove crucial in identifying her real killer. The breakthrough came in February 2009, when Judge Richard Callahan reviewed the mountain of evidence Walter had uncovered. In a scathing 44-page ruling, Callahan stated that Kezer had been betrayed by almost every level of the judicial process. After 16 years behind bars, Joshua Kezer walked out of prison a free man. The state of Missouri would later settle his civil rights lawsuit for $4 million. But Kezer's release wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Despite winning his freedom and a multi-million-dollar settlement, Kezer did something extraordinary. He donated $10,000 back to the investigation to help find Michelle's real killer.
We don't just need someone, but we need people. We need the right people to do the right thing. I don't care if this gets solved and everybody forgets my name and no one ever gives me credit for the years of hard work that I put into this. That's a part of the story, but the purpose is to talk about Michelle, to bring everybody's attention to Michelle.
Walter's investigation had not only freed an innocent man, it had reopened the hunt for the real killer.
We're constantly working on the case. We're looking at everything fresh. It's a blank slate. We start from the crime scene and work our way back from there and try to piece together the last hours, the last days of Michelle's life, looking for clues. We're going to, instead of choosing a suspect and then trying to make all the evidence fit around them, we're allowing the evidence to lead us to the suspect.
As investigators revisited old evidence with new eyes and modern forensic techniques, they began to focus on someone who had been there all along, someone whose connection to Michelle had been far more personal than anyone realized.
And, you know, I've had time to do that, and I'm starting to branch out and work potential suspect paths and try to figure out where it's going to lead us. Found people that need to be interviewed that never were.
Sometimes the answers to a murder mystery lie in plain sight. For 32 years, the truth about Michelle Lawless's death had been hidden in her own diary pages and beneath her fingernails. The man who had watched an innocent teenager go to prison for his crime had been there from the beginning. Leon Lamb, Michelle's boyfriend of 3 years. The breakthrough came when investigators took a fresh look at Michelle's personal writings. Her diary painted a troubling picture of her relationship with Lamb, revealing a darker side to what appeared to be young love. Between the lines of teenage romance lay hints of jealousy, control, and volatile behavior, but it was modern forensic science that would finally turn these suspicions into evidence. The DNA material found under Michelle's fingernails, which had helped free Joshua Kezer, told a damning story. When the Missouri State Highway Patrol Crime Lab analyzed the blood in 2008, they found it matched Leon Lamb's DNA profile. This wasn't just trace evidence. It suggested Michelle had fought desperately against someone she knew intimately. Investigators also began to see Lamb's original statement in a new light. He had claimed Michelle visited him between 11:30 p.m. and midnight on November 7th, saying they had passionate sex that resulted in her scratching him. According to Lamb, she left his home at 1 a.m., but this timeline was impossible. Witness Dallas Butler had already seen Michelle alive at the exit ramp around 1 a.m., and the drive time alone made Lamb's story fall apart. The case took an even darker turn when investigators discovered that Lamb's controlling behavior hadn't ended with Michelle's death. He had moved to Arkansas, building a new life, while the wrong man sat in prison for his crime. For over 3 decades, he had lived with the knowledge that he had not only taken Michelle's life, but had allowed an innocent teenager to pay for his actions.
It's called a monster, calling me a killer.
The pieces finally came together in December 2024, armed with the DNA evidence, witness statements, and a carefully reconstructed timeline. Authorities moved in. On December 20th, law enforcement officers arrested Leon Lamb in Conway, Arkansas. At 52 years old, Michelle's former boyfriend was finally facing justice for a crime he had committed as a young man. The 32-year journey from murder to arrest had exposed every flaw in the criminal justice system. An overzealous prosecution had sent the wrong man to prison.
This is not going to settle in on me probably for weeks. And I have no doubt that at some point I'm going to fall down on my knees and I'm just going to cry out and I'm going to thank God and I'm going to weep like a little baby and I'm going to be okay with that.
Witnesses had lied under oath. Evidence had been mishandled. But in the end, the truth had emerged through a combination of modern science, dogged investigation, and the determination of those who never stopped seeking justice for Michelle. The final irony was that Lamb had already provided the evidence of his guilt back in 1992. The DNA under Michelle's fingernails, which he had explained away as the result of passionate sex, had been his undoing. Modern forensic testing had revealed what investigators now believed. Those scratches weren't from passion, but from Michelle's desperate fight for her life. Leon Lamb's arrest in December 2024 should have been the final chapter in this 3-decade saga, but like everything else in this case, even the end would prove complicated. Now 52 years old, Lamb is fighting extradition from Arkansas to Missouri, where he faces first-degree murder charges for a crime committed in his youth. Now, Lamb sits in custody without bond, his attempts to resist extradition merely delaying the inevitable. Prosecutors in Missouri are prepared to present their case armed with DNA evidence, witness statements, and 32 years of accumulated proof that points to the man who had been hiding in plain sight all along. Some say time heals all wounds, but in Benton, Missouri, the scars of November 8, 1992, run deep. 2 lives were destroyed that night. Michelle Lawless, whose promising future was brutally cut short, and Joshua Kezer, who lost 16 years of his youth to a wrongful conviction. Yet through it all, justice never stopped searching for the truth. But what do you think? Could better investigative procedures have prevented Joshua Kezer's wrongful conviction? How many other killers might be out there watching as innocent people pay for their crimes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to see more true crime stories about cold cases finally solved through modern forensics, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video about justice finally catching up with those who thought they'd gotten away with murder. Stay safe, and remember, no matter how long it takes, the truth has a way of coming to light.
About me saying what they did to me was fine, because it wasn't. It's wrong. And there's no excuse. But sometimes things happen to you and you got to roll with the punch.